Up first, we are joined by Argenica Therapeutics with the ticker code AGN, a company developing novel therapeutics to reduce brain damage after stroke. To tell us more, today I am joined by CEO and Managing Director, Dr. Liz Dallimore. Good morning, Liz.
Hi, Jane. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Great. Let me just bring up your presentation.
Thanks. Great, thank you. So thanks everyone that's joined online. As Jane said, I am Liz Dallimore. I am the CEO and MD of Argenica Therapeutics. So just a quick one on disclaimer on forward-looking statements in this presentation. So I'll just give you a quick sort of snapshot of Argenica, who we are and what we are looking to do. So we are developing novel neuroprotective therapeutics. So these are drugs that are able to protect brain cells following injury. So we're predominantly looking at indications in ischemic stroke. So this is a stroke caused by a clot in a blood vessel in the brain. Ischemic strokes make up around 85% of all strokes. We're also looking at indications in traumatic brain injury and concussion, in infant stroke or HIE, and also in chronic conditions such as Alzheimer's disease. But really, as a company, what drives us is being able to positively impact the lives of these patients. There are currently no neuroprotective drugs on the market that are able to protect brain cells following these types of acute and chronic injuries. So whilst impacting patients' lives, we are unlocking huge commercial opportunities in these large unmet needs. So really exciting time for the company and some really fantastic catalysts coming up. So just a quick snapshot of where we're at the moment. So we currently have just over 8 million cash in the bank as of last quarter, and that doesn't include a $1.2 million grant that we received from the federal government to progress our research in traumatic brain injury and concussion. We have completed a phase 1 clinical trial. I'll go into a little bit more in the presentation and what that means for the company. But we're sitting around 35 mil market cap. So for going into phase 2, it's a pretty cheap market cap, so a good time to buy. So just a bit more on our lead drug candidate. It's known as ARG-007, and it has been in development for over 10 years at the Neuroscience Research Institute and the University of Western Australia here in Perth. We have over 25 peer-reviewed publications on how that drug works, predominantly in stroke, but also in TBI and HIE. We've got further preclinical data not published in other indications as well. We have completed our phase 1 clinical trial, which shows that our drug is safe to deliver to humans, which is a huge de-risking aspect for a drug development company such as our own. We own all the IP outright within the company, and we have patents granted in multiple jurisdictions, including key markets that we're looking to commercialise the drug into. So why are we going after stroke predominantly? So stroke is a huge issue globally. 1 in 4 people will suffer a stroke in their lifetime. I think some people think that that's only reserved for older people, but more younger people are having stroke. And we are actually seeing the incidence of stroke going up post-COVID, which is really concerning. And of those people that suffer a stroke, only around 10% of them will recover fully. And that's because of the extent of brain cell death that you see post-stroke because of that lack of oxygen that the brain is receiving due to the clot in the blood vessel in the brain. So there are currently no therapies available that are able to protect those brain cells following stroke. And so Argenica has a huge opportunity to tap into that large unmet need and the huge market in stroke. So just quickly on stroke in terms of how we fit into standard of care. So when doing drug development, it's really important that you develop your drug so that it can fit nicely into the current standard of care. So when someone has a stroke, there's really little that the paramedic can do by way of triage. So the aim is to get that patient to hospital as soon as possible. so that they can be scanned to determine the location of the stroke, the type of stroke that that patient has, and then work out the best way to try to remove that clot if possible. But all that time, all that delay results in increasing amounts of cell death in the brain, which leads to worse functional outcomes for these patients. So what we're aiming to do is to be able to deliver our drug in the ambulance to stop that amount of cell death, stop it in its tracks, and buy that patient time to get to hospital. So we've got some really compelling preclinical data. So this is data that we've published in a non-human primate model of ischemic stroke. And we've shown that our drug is able to reduce that amount of cell death in the brain post-stroke by 66%, which is better than our nearest competitor, NA1, which is currently just completed its second phase 3 trial. And what's really important is that even though we're only delivering a single intravenous injection of our drug, that protection is lasting out to 28 days. So that patient, they're not getting any further increases in brain cell death, which is really important. So as I said, we've got really encouraging results to date. We've shown in preclinical models that our drug is able to significantly reduce the amount of brain cell death. We also know that it's safe to administer in the field by paramedics. It doesn't exacerbate bleeding or lead to any hemorrhage. We haven't seen any adverse effects in our phase 1 clinical trial. And we also know that our drug can be administered with the current treatment regime that stroke patients receive, including clot dissolving drugs. So just quickly on the phase 1 trial, so we did recently announce our final safety data from that trial, where we saw no clinically significant adverse events at all within any of the doses delivered to healthy participants. Interestingly, we actually saw more sort of mild minor adverse effects in the placebo group. So we know that our drug now is safe to deliver via IV infusion into healthy patients. And so now the plan is to move into a phase 2 clinical trial to look at not only the safety of our drug in stroke patients, but also to see how much and the extent of reduction in that brain cell death that we're getting from our drug in stroke patients. So just the timeline for that. So there's a few things to work through to get into delivering our drug into stroke patients. So the main one is ethics approval to be able to undertake this clinical trial in a number of stroke care units in Australia. But ultimately, we're looking to be dosing our first stroke patient by the end of this calendar year. So we're just working through that process at the moment, developing the protocol, writing the ethics application to get into patients. So we really do see, as I mentioned before, ARG-007 as a technology platform. Because it works on multiple mechanisms of action, the high positive charge of the drug itself lends itself to a number of other neurological conditions. So we've progressed quite far in hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. This is a reduction in blood flow to the brain in newborn infants. So it can result from preeclampsia, cord wrapped around the neck, or complications during labour. And these babies have quite dire outcomes. So it can lead to severe cerebral palsy, severe learning difficulties, and cognitive dysfunction. So we've got some really compelling preclinical data in that, and we're progressing in that indication into clinical trials. What's I guess good from a drug development point of view in HIE is that it is also a rare disease. So we will go for orphan drug designation to be able to accelerate those clinical trials in those patients. We're also, as I mentioned, looking at severe and mild TBI, so that's also concussion, and have the federal government grant to progress those studies, as well as cardiac arrest and neuroprotection following cardiac arrest. And we've recently released some data around Alzheimer's disease, so I'll come to that. So quickly on the HIE data, so what we've found is really exciting data in a term animal model. So term meaning 37 weeks and beyond gestation. So we're getting an 86% reduction, which is quite significant in these animal models at our 300 nanomole per kilogram dose of ARG-007. So the next step in the HIE is to do it in larger animal models and then put in for an investigational new drug to start clinical trials in that indication. And as I mentioned, we've got data in vitro model of Alzheimer's disease. So we're showing, again, a significant reduction in beta amyloid. So beta amyloid is it's a protein that aggregates during Alzheimer's. So it's one of the markers of Alzheimer's disease. There are other markers such as tau aggregation, neuroinflammation, but this is sort of the first step in our journey to proving that our drug could be a potential therapy in Alzheimer's disease. Again, we've recently received a grant to be able to progress animal studies in Alzheimer's to collect further data in that indication. So I am supported in this journey by a fantastic team, board and management team, which is, they've all got experience in either capital markets or drug development. So fantastic to have them all on board and help me through the process. And as we go into our phase 2 clinical trial in stroke, I have some of the world's heavy hitters in neurology. So in particular, David Blacker, who has run a number of stroke trials, chairs our clinical advisory committee. Dr. Jeff Saver out of UCLA is the man to go to. He's run the most phase 2 clinical trials in stroke globally. So absolute fantastic to have their advisory and their support as we move into the phase 2 clinical trials. So just to wrap it all up, why do we think Argenica is a fantastic investment at the moment? We have significantly de-risked our drug asset in terms of preclinical data. 25 peer-reviewed published papers. They're available if anyone wants to dig into the science, more than happy to send them to you. At the moment, we have a really strong balance sheet to lead into the phase 2 trial. We've de-risked our asset in humans, healthy humans, in our phase 1 clinical trial with no adverse events seen. And we've also got multiple shots on goal here. So not just stroke, but really exciting data coming through with other indications. And as I said, able to access grants and supported by a fantastic team. So I hope you've enjoyed the story. We're really excited about the next 12 months ahead and looking forward to sharing the news as it comes to hand. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. Great presentation as always. A couple of questions, so I'll jump into them. So what are the current drugs in the market that provide a similar solution, and how do they compare?
Sure. So there are no neuroprotective drugs in the market at the moment. So it is actually quite a hot area. So there is the one that's probably closest to market is that one that I put on the slide, NA1, that is being developed by a Canadian company called Nono Inc. They have just completed a second phase 3 trial. However, they cannot deliver their drug with the clot dissolving drug. So slightly more challenging. So they're going after a smaller subset of patients than we are. All our preclinical data, we compare our drug to their drug, and we do see greater efficacy in our drug each time. So, and then there's a few others coming through the pipeline. I'm actually in the US next week to meet a few of these other companies and the FDA to work out how do we accelerate these drugs onto the market.
Well, thanks for that, Liz. That actually leads into my next question. So when will the drug likely be commercialized?
So we have to do the phase 2 trials, obviously. So we expect recruitment to be around 18 months and then final data package, so 6 months later. So 2 years for a phase 2 trial, and that will give us some indication of efficacy of the drug. And then we do have to do a bigger global phase 3 trial. So that's probably another kind of 3 years. But we're always talking to companies around, potentially partnering. So I guess the commercialization for us as a company could be a deal post phase 2, and then, let another pharma company sort of push and pay for the phase 3 and get it onto the market.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Liz. That's all we've got time for today. But
No problem.
I would encourage webinar attendees to reach out via the contact details on the bottom of the ASX releases if they've got further questions. But thank you again.
Thanks, Jane. See ya.